Chef Sky, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank
Perfect. I'm
you.
actually in the kitchen currently.
Good to see you, and thank you for that lecture. As you were talking, I was thinking about myself, not only standing in front of the refrigerator thinking about what I'm going to eat
Mhm.
and being kind of paralyzed by it all, but then being in the supermarket and looking at the labels on the food. I wondered if you could just comment about what a consumer should know about those labels, whether they're informative or not, and how to use them and where to go in terms of making healthy choices.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to food labels, this is kind of a tricky subject because how we label our food in the US is based off daily values and dietary guidelines that we're currently revisiting to determine, what nutrients are more important than others. So my first go-to when looking at a food label is usually the less words and ingredients on the label, the better. If it has more than, 5 to 10 ingredients, usually 10 is my cutoff. That's kind of where I draw a line of, well, this is probably a little bit over processed. I want to look for something that's usually 10 or less. Great, 5 or less, amazing. The other thing I look for is the first word in the ingredient list is usually going to be the most prominent ingredient within that item. So if I see sugar, dextrose, anything with ose, that's going to be a sugar containing food that might not be as beneficial of a choice as others. I'll usually stray away from. If the first is wheat or flour, I usually look for like unprocessed, unbleached. Whole grain is another good term to look for. So definitely look at, the amount of ingredients first, and then what ingredient is on that first list of your ingredient list. And then from there, I look at the servings and calories, because you might look at something and say, oh, this has 100 calories in it. This must be a great choice. But then if you look at the servings in the package, it's 4 to 5 servings in the package. And most of us, like myself, are going to buy a bag of chips and probably eat more than the 10 chip serving on the bag. So definitely kind of take a glance at that next. The next one I would look at is the amount of fiber. If you are going to purchase something that is processed, you definitely want to make sure you're getting like above 5 grams of fiber is like my minimum bar. If you can get over like 10 grams, amazing, but the more fiber, the better. Then look at your added sugars. We always want to keep those minimal in terms of processed foods on the food label. So when I say minimal, of course, under 10 grams, amazing. Anything less than that, even better. I also look at trans fats and saturated fats. Obviously, you want to go for 0 trans fats and then minimal saturated fats as well. Overall, though, I think getting into the nuances of all of the numbers on the food label, I just like to stick with the ingredient list. If it's less than those 5 ingredients and I feel good about the choice that I'm making, then usually an all right choice there.
On that label, there's a couple things that always confuse me, like calories.
Mhm.
How is someone to think about, is that mean that those calories are appropriate for each individual? How do we understand that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most food labels are based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, meaning that we're using that food in reference to that 2,000 calorie a day diet, which for every individual, the amount of calories we need is going to differ. So, typically when I look at calories, I'll look at servings and help determine if, the amount of servings is worth the calories almost, if that makes sense. A lot of the times, if you're using like a food log to help you track, you can see if that makes sense in your, calorie distribution. But overall, it's a little hard to say whether or not it's applicable for everyone. It's usually not on the other end. But yeah, that's a great question.
Well, there's a growing controversy that the calorie counts are based on laboratory values, and then as individuals, we all process food differently, and the calorie access in the food may vary 10, 20, 30 times, one side or another for an individual.
Yep.
The other issue is the issue of protein that many are interested in, and the idea that those labels don't actually include very much about protein, or are there ways to understand it, or how would you think about guiding how you would take protein in? And does it always have to be meat? Is plant-based protein really okay? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So to go to your point, it's like we always used to say the phrase "you are what you," or "we are what we eat." That's like a very common phrase, but now we're shifting in the scientific and nutrition world to "you are what you absorb," and that kind of reflects the maybe not 100% accuracy of calories and everything depicted on food labels. When it comes to protein, most of the time, most of the protein that is shown on a food label is the crude protein, which is actually measured through the amount of nitrogen present within the food, because every amino acid has a nitrogen attached to it, and no other no carbs, fats aren't like that. So scientifically, we can look at the nitrogen within the food and correlate that to the amount of protein within the food, and that's how we're actually getting it. We also, most food labels should be tweaking their protein amounts based on PDCAS, which is protein digestibility, which is kind of this new concept that's been around for the past, I don't know, like decade. And when I say new, it's because we don't have a lot of information on a lot of varieties of food. We have a very small window of foods that we can actually do this mathematics with, which is basically taking that crude protein within the food, multiplying it by this percentage that gives us like roughly the amount of protein that would be available for our bodies to actually absorb and process. When it comes to protein sources, writing an article about this right now, actually, there's still, from what I have found, I don't think you can necessarily say that one is better than the other in terms of plant and meat, because we're all individual people and we're all going to be processing that protein differently, breaking it down into amino acids, and then reconfiguring it for what we need. I think in terms of getting good quality protein, it's going to come back to that variety in your diet. So maybe, if you are vegan or vegetarian, try to get nuts and seeds, and maybe look at tofu or pumpkin tofu for that protein variety. Also, plants have protein in them in small amounts. So all your dark leafy greens, all your cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, all your beans too. That's a great way to look at it. If you're not vegan or vegetarian, you can definitely get your protein from fish and meat and just different sources like that, and kind of pair it throughout the week.
Well, I was surprised to find out how much protein is in a pea.
Right. That's why it's so common to use.
Very remarkable. Probably more, per geometric size than in meat. So it's interesting. Now, you mentioned, the benefits of eating locally and seasonally, that, would kind of take one to a farmer's market. Can you explain why that's important, both to an individual for their health, but also for the health of the world?
Yeah, of course. I think for your individual health, eating locally, kind of like I mentioned in my lecture, will help you diversify eating seasonally, which means you're going to eat foods that are seasonal and higher in nutrients that your body probably needs during the season. So today we're going to be cooking butternut squash, which is a fall vegetable, which has a higher amount of vitamin A and vitamin C and vitamin K, which boost your immunity. So you can think of it individually as eating with the seasons translates to probably getting more of the nutrients that I'm going to need to support my body throughout the year in the flow. It also gets you moving. It gets you out of the house. It gets you, whether you're walking to the farmer's market or, driving there and then walking around, you're probably going to spend a good 30 minutes moving your body. So that's another individual benefit of taking the time to go out there. The community aspect of it is very beautiful as well. I don't think I've ever seen someone just blow through the farmer's market without at least stopping to talk to one person or ask a question about a vegetable or fruit. So getting that little human interaction in there, especially after we've all been inside for so long, can be a very beautiful and beneficial thing. In terms of like the agricultural side of it and the agricultural industry, developing that relationship with the farmers market or any market between yourself and those communities benefits them monetarily. So financially, you're going to help support local farmers and small farmers that may be having trouble staying afoot, especially because if you didn't know, the process to become an organic farmer in the US is actually quite costly. And even though if you can make enough money as a farmer to pay for that, and then you'll be able to sell your produce for more on the long run, most locally owned community farms won't have that kind of income to do that. And that doesn't mean that their vegetables and produce and resources are less nutritious than the organic labeled ones. So I think the financial benefit and the supporting your local community and building those different avenues of connection can be very beneficial to everyone in the long run.
So it sounds like what you're saying is if you go to a farmer's market, you're more likely than not to get whole food,
Yes.
Non-processed food.
Yes.
And that you'll support a community that provides that process. So, if we engage in that, we'll have more access to it. And hopefully farmers markets will be available to us on a daily basis close by. For many, they only happen once in a while, far away, et cetera, which is too bad. In Sacramento, we really, we really benefit from having incredible access. But for people who go to that farmer's market and, walk in and think, well, everything here is healthy. What do you want to say about that? Kind of the debate of, do I buy organic or not? And then the financial burdens that come with those decisions as well. We'll close with that question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'd like to say that everything at a farmer's market is healthy, but farmers markets have become just markets in general now. So you find a lot of bakeries, you find a lot of restaurants bringing in their food, and not to say their food isn't healthy, but when we think of that term, like you said, we're going to look for the whole food options. So if I'm going to my farmer's market in terms of making better food choices or increasing nutrient density in my diet, I'm going to stray away from maybe those market vendors and go towards the farmers and go towards the produce stands. And, the organic versus non-organic, I always like to tell people, if you can, develop a relationship with your food grower. You don't necessarily need to buy organic. You can go to some of the other farm practices and maybe inquire about their farming practices and be like, hey, do y'all, what kind of farming practices do y'all use? Do you use any pesticides or herbicides? And they'll usually be pretty open about telling you. So that's kind of a good way, because buying organic can be quite costly and you don't really need to spend the extra money. Usually most farmers markets are good about vetting the sources and the vendors and farmers that they're coming into their market and selling locally.
Chef Sky, can you say a few words about what you're planning for this afternoon and what's on the menu and the agenda for your session at 2:00?
Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to. So for the next 3 weekends, we're going to be doing different recipes. Today's recipe is going to be vegan and vegetarian focused. So we'll be preparing a roasted butternut squash and farro salad with some shaved Brussels sprouts, kale, and then making a probiotic parsley dressing. So I'll be speaking on how to increase the nutrient density within your salad dressings. Happy to speak on all the substitutions you can use in the recipe. We'll be talking about ancient grains, farro specifically, gluten-free options. It's going to be super fun, and I hope y'all join me because it's going to be a great time.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very, very much. That was great. And for many of us, we'll see you in a few hours.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah.